The complex layers of human emotions often reveal why someone might crave connection yet fail to act on it. When a person desires you deeply but never contacts you, it's essential to understand that the silence is often rooted in internal conflicts and an overwhelming fear of vulnerability. This fear can create a paralyzing barrier, holding him back from taking steps to bridge the gap, even when his heart longs to do so. Vulnerability is not easy for many people. It involves exposing one's true self, risking rejection, and opening up to the possibility of emotional pain. For some, this can feel like stepping into the unknown without the assurance of safety. Fear of vulnerability is closely tied to past experiences. If he has been hurt before or faced rejection in a meaningful way, those memories might resurface whenever he considers reaching out. The risk of repeating that pain can outweigh his desire to connect, leaving him stuck in a place of emotional stasis. It's not that he doesn't care. In fact, the depth of his feelings may amplify his hesitation. The more he craves the connection, the more he fears losing it or not being enough. And so he chooses inaction over the perceived risk of failure. This fear often intertwines with deeply ingrained coping mechanisms. For some, avoiding vulnerability becomes a way of protecting their sense of self. By not reaching out, they maintain a semblance of control over their emotions, shielding themselves from potential hurt. This self-protection, while understandable, comes at a cost. It leads to missed opportunities for genuine connection and can leave the other person feeling confused and unvalued. He may not realize that his silence sends its own message, often interpreted as disinterest or lack of care, even though the truth might be the complete opposite. The internal battle doesn't just stem from fear, but also from an inability to fully process or articulate emotions. Men, in particular, are often conditioned to suppress feelings and avoid showing emotional vulnerability. They may lack the tools or language to express their inner desires in a way that feels safe and authentic. When he craves you but remains silent, it could be because he doesn't know how to navigate the complex maze of his emotions. This internal struggle creates a disconnection between his feelings and actions, leaving a painful void that neither party understands fully. In some cases, his silence may also stem from an attempt to protect you. He might believe that he carries emotional baggage or unresolved issues that could harm the relationship if he lets you in. This mindset can lead him to withhold contact, thinking it's a form of selflessness. Ironically, this silence often has the opposite effect, creating confusion and emotional distance instead of fostering understanding or resolution. Additionally, societal pressures and cultural expectations can play a significant role in his hesitation. Men are often taught to appear strong, independent, and self-reliant, with vulnerability seen as a weakness. These expectations create an internalized conflict that makes reaching out feel like a failure to uphold a societal ideal. This struggle between societal conditioning and his true emotions can be incredibly challenging to reconcile, leading to prolonged periods of silence despite his yearning for connection. It's important to remember that his actions or lack thereof are rarely a reflection of your worth. His fear of vulnerability is his burden to confront and overcome. You can't force someone to open up or take the first step toward connection, but you can acknowledge that their silence often has more to do with their internal struggles than anything you've done. When silence fills the space where words could have been, it's a sign that he is grappling with his own emotions. Understanding this dynamic allows you to approach the situation with empathy, knowing that his hesitation doesn't diminish the depth of his feelings. It simply highlights the barriers he has yet to break through. Pride and ego can be powerful forces in human relationships, shaping how people respond to their own emotions and interactions with others. When someone craves you but doesn't reach out, it's often not about a lack of desire or affection, but about their internal struggle with pride and ego. These forces can act as invisible barriers, preventing them from making the first move, even when their heart urges them to. For some, reaching out feels like relinquishing control or exposing themselves to vulnerability, which their ego perceives as a weakness. Pride often arises as a defense mechanism, protecting the self from potential rejection or perceived humiliation. If someone feels deeply for you but has experienced rejection in the past, they may build walls of pride to shield themselves from future pain. These walls can make it incredibly difficult for them to admit their feelings or take steps to bridge the gap. They may tell themselves that if they hold back, they retain a sense of power or dignity, even if it costs them a chance at connection. This need to protect their pride can lead to inaction, no matter how much they crave your presence in their life. Ego complicates the situation further by creating a narrative where making the first move is seen as surrendering power. In a world that often equates control with strength, taking the initiative might feel like losing the upper hand. For someone struggling with ego, the thought of appearing desperate or overly invested can be terrifying. They may convince themselves that if they wait for you to make the first move, they'll maintain their sense of independence and self-assurance. However, this mindset often backfires, leaving both sides feeling unfulfilled and disconnected. In some cases, this dynamic is rooted in societal conditioning. Many people, particularly men, are taught to value stoicism and self-reliance. They learn that showing vulnerability or expressing neediness is a sign of weakness, something to be avoided at all costs. This cultural expectation feeds into their ego, making it difficult for them to reconcile their deep desire for connection with the fear of being perceived as weak. As a result, they may remain silent even as their emotions pull them toward you. The interplay of pride and ego can also create a toxic cycle of overthinking. Instead of acting on their feelings, they may replay scenarios in their mind, analyzing every possible outcome. This overthinking often leads to the belief that reaching out will make them look foolish or overly eager, further entrenching their reluctance. The irony is that this hesitation only amplifies the distance between you, fostering misunderstandings and emotional strain. It's worth noting that pride and ego are not inherently negative traits. They can serve as valuable tools for self-preservation and confidence in certain situations. However, when they become rigid barriers to connection, they prevent growth and authenticity in relationships. The person may not even realize the extent to which their pride and ego are influencing their actions. To them, it may feel like they're simply protecting themselves, unaware of the opportunity for deeper connection that they're letting slip away. Understanding this dynamic requires empathy and patience. Recognizing that their silence may stem from an internal struggle rather than a lack of care can help you navigate the situation with compassion. However, it's also essential to remember that you cannot force someone to overcome their pride or ego. That journey is theirs to undertake, and it requires self-awareness and a willingness to grow. You can offer understanding and support, but ultimately, they must decide to break down their own walls. In the end, their silence is not a reflection of your worth, but of their inner conflict. Pride and ego may hold them back today, but the potential for growth and connection always exists if they choose to confront and overcome these barriers. Unresolved emotional wounds are often the silent architects of behavior, shaping how people approach relationships and connections. When someone craves you yet doesn't reach out, it's essential to consider the possibility that they are carrying unhealed trauma or emotional baggage. These wounds act as invisible chains, restricting their ability to act on their feelings, even when those emotions are deeply genuine. The weight of their past can be a significant force, influencing their actions or lack thereof in ways they might not even fully understand. Trauma, whether it stems from past relationships, family dynamics, or personal experiences, leaves imprints on a person's heart and mind. These imprints often manifest as fear of rejection, fear of being hurt again, or fear of repeating painful patterns. For someone who craves connection but remains silent, these fears can feel all-consuming, creating an internal conflict between their desire to reach out and their instinct to protect themselves. But the more uncertain or fearful you are, the more fertile the response may be to rejection. Their silence is not about you, it's about the battles they're fighting within themselves. Unhealed wounds often lead to emotional triggers, moments when their past pain resurfaces in the present. For example, they might misinterpret a simple action or word as a sign of potential rejection, even when no such threat exists. This hypervigilance becomes a protective mechanism, but it also keeps them trapped, unable to fully embrace the vulnerability that genuine connection requires. Their inability to separate the past from the present prevents them from moving forward, leaving their desires unspoken and their actions frozen. In some cases, these emotional wounds create a sense of unworthiness. They might crave you deeply, but feel that they don't deserve your time, attention, or love. This belief, whether conscious or subconscious, can be incredibly limiting, It whispers doubts into their mind, convincing them that reaching out will only lead to disappointment or rejection. They might think that staying silent is the safest option, even though it's also the most isolating one. This cycle of self-doubt perpetuates their inaction, keeping them stuck in a loop of craving without connection. Emotional wounds also have a way of distorting perception. When someone has been hurt in the past, they may struggle to see relationships through a clear lens. They might project their past pain onto you, assuming that history will repeat itself, even if you've given no indication of that. This projection serves as a shield, allowing them to keep their guard up, but it also blocks the potential for a meaningful connection. They are so focused on avoiding potential pain that they miss the opportunity for healing and growth that your presence could offer. Healing from trauma is not a straightforward journey, and it's one that requires time, effort, and often professional support. For someone grappling with unresolved wounds, the idea of reaching out can feel like opening a door to emotions they've worked hard to suppress. This fear of confronting their pain keeps them silent, even as their desire for connection grows. It's not that they don't care. It's that they don't yet know how to navigate the complex web of their emotions. Understanding their silence through the lens of unhealed trauma allows you to approach the situation with compassion. It doesn't mean excusing their inaction or sacrificing your own needs, but it does mean recognizing that their behavior is more about their inner struggles than about you. At the same time, it's important to remember that you cannot heal someone else's wounds. That is a journey they must undertake for themselves, and it requires a willingness to confront their pain and seek growth. Their silence, though painful, is not necessarily permanent. With time and effort, they may find the courage to face their past and embrace the vulnerability that connection demands. Until then, understanding their struggle can help you find peace, knowing that their silence is not a reflection of your worth, but of their need for healing. People often find themselves torn between their desires and the walls they've built to protect their vulnerabilities. When someone craves you but refrains from reaching out, one significant factor could be their fear of losing control over their emotions or the situation. Control to them is a shield, something they've likely relied on to maintain balance in their lives. Letting that control slip, even for the sake of a meaningful connection, feels too risky. This tension between wanting connection and guarding their emotional territory becomes the foundation of their hesitation. For many, the act of reaching out symbolizes vulnerability, a potential loss of control. When someone craves you but avoids taking that step, it's often because they equate vulnerability with weakness or exposure. They might fear that expressing their emotions could lead to rejection, embarrassment, or even the loss of the power they feel in their current position. This dynamic is not about manipulation, but about self-preservation. They want to maintain the upper hand, or at least the illusion of it, to shield themselves from emotional harm. This fear of losing control is deeply rooted in past experiences. Perhaps they've been in situations where vulnerability was met with pain, betrayal, or exploitation. Those memories linger, shaping how they navigate relationships. Even though their desire for you might be genuine, it is eclipsed by their instinct to protect themselves. They might think, what if reaching out gives away too much of my power? Or what if I'm left regretting this moment of openness? These internal dialogues keep them stuck, torn between craving connection and avoiding perceived risk. Another aspect of this dynamic is their struggle with emotional regulation. When someone fears losing control, it's often because they don't trust their ability to handle the emotions that come with vulnerability. The thought of being rejected or misunderstood might feel overwhelming, almost paralyzing. They might anticipate a cascade of feelings they're not prepared to face: sadness, anger, disappointment. To avoid that potential emotional storm, they retreat into silence, convincing themselves it's the safer option. This need for control also extends to how they perceive the balance of power in relationships. They may believe that the person who reaches out first is at a disadvantage, more exposed, more likely to be hurt. By staying silent, they feel they are maintaining a sense of power, even though that silence comes at the cost of connection. This distorted view of power dynamics can keep them locked in a cycle of craving yet resisting, wanting yet withholding. In some cases, the fear of losing control stems from a perfectionist mindset. They might feel that if they can't approach you with complete confidence or guarantee a positive outcome, it's better not to act at all. This all or no thinking Thinking becomes a barrier, preventing them from taking even small steps toward connection. They might wait for the perfect moment, the perfect words, or the perfect scenario, none of which exist. In their pursuit of control, they miss the opportunities that imperfection and vulnerability often bring. It's also worth considering that this fear of losing control can lead to overthinking. They might analyze every possible outcome of reaching out, weighing the risks and benefits to an exhausting degree. This mental loop keeps them stuck in inaction, as no scenario feels safe enough or worth the potential cost. The irony is that in their effort to maintain control, they lose it to their own minds, becoming prisoners of their own mind. Understanding this fear of losing control helps you see their silence for what it truly is, a protective mechanism, not a reflection of how they feel about you. While it's natural to feel hurt or frustrated by their inaction, it's also important to recognize that this is their battle, not yours. You cannot force them to let go of their fear or to act against their instincts. What you can do is focus on your own peace and clarity, knowing that their silence is not a measure of your worth, but of their internal struggle. When someone craves you but never contacts you, it might be due to their fear of disrupting the status quo. Human beings are creatures of habit, and even when we desire something deeply, the thought of stepping out of our comfort zone can feel daunting. For the person in question, the life they have constructed, complete with its routines, defenses, and unspoken rules, provides a sense of predictability. Reaching out to you introduces the unknown, a shift they may not feel ready to embrace, no matter how strongly they yearn for connection. The status quo, for many, is synonymous with safety. Even if their current state of being includes loneliness or longing, it is familiar. Familiarity provides a sense of control, even when it isn't fulfilling. The idea of contacting you, of inviting a new dynamic into their life, carries with it an inherent risk. What if it doesn't work out? What if it introduces more uncertainty, more vulnerability than they're prepared to handle? These questions can weigh heavily, leading them to cling to the safety of what they know rather than risk the discomfort of what they don't. Another reason they might avoid disrupting the status quo is the fear of rejection. If they've convinced themselves that the current arrangement, one where they silently crave but don't act, is more bearable than risking a definitive no from you, they'll stay stuck. To them, maintaining the status quo keeps their hope alive. It allows them to imagine possibilities without having to face the reality that those possibilities might not align with their expectations. It's not that they don't want you, it's that they fear the consequences of trying to have you. This mindset can also stem from overanalyzing the potential fallout of reaching out. They might worry about how their actions will be perceived, how the dynamics of your interaction might change, or how they'll navigate the relationship if things progress. In their mind, every potential scenario has a downside, and the weight of those imagined risks keeps them from taking the first step. They convince themselves that maintaining the status quo is the lesser of two evils, even though it means sacrificing what they truly desire. In some cases, their hesitation to disrupt the status quo might come from a deep-seated belief that they don't deserve you or the connection they crave. If they see you as someone extraordinary, someone out of their league, they might feel unworthy of entering your world. This sense of inadequacy becomes a self-imposed barrier, keeping them in a cycle of longing but never acting. They might think, what do I have to offer? Or why would they choose me? These thoughts can be paralyzing, reinforcing their decision to remain silent. Their reluctance to act could also be tied to timing. They might convince themselves that the current moment isn't the right one, that they need to be in a better place emotionally, financially, or otherwise before they can reach out to you. While this might sound reasonable on the surface, it's often a form of procrastination fueled by fear. The perfect time rarely exists, but their fixation on finding it keeps them from disrupting the status quo, ensuring that their longing remains unfulfilled. Lastly, it's important to consider that their fear of disrupting the status quo might not just be about themselves, it could be about you as well. They might worry that reaching out could complicate your life or disrupt your sense of balance. If they care deeply for you, they might hold back, thinking they're sparing you from potential complications or discomfort. While their intentions may be noble, their silence ultimately robs both of you of the chance to explore what could be. Understanding this fear can provide clarity, but it also reinforces an important truth. Their decision to stay silent is about them, not you. You are not responsible for their fears or their choice to remain in their comfort zone. What you can do is honor your own boundaries and desires, recognizing that true connection requires action and courage from both sides. When someone craves you yet avoids reaching out, their silence can often be attributed to their own battles with self-worth. Deep down, they might be grappling with insecurities and a belief that they're not good enough for you. This internal struggle manifests in hesitation and withdrawal, despite their longing for connection. It's important to recognize that their actions or lack thereof are not a reflection of your value, but rather a mirror of their inner fears and doubts. Insecurity can be a powerful force. It whispers lies to the person experiencing it, telling them they are inadequate, unworthy, or incapable of meeting your expectations. These thoughts can spiral, creating a narrative in their mind where every potential outcome feels like a confirmation of their perceived inadequacy. They may worry that if they reach out, they'll only end up disappointing you or failing to live up to the image they think you have of them. As a result, they retreat into silence, avoiding the risk of rejection and the discomfort of facing their own vulnerabilities. This battle with self-worth often goes hand in hand with fear of vulnerability. To reach out and express their feelings would require them to expose parts of themselves they might not be ready to share. Vulnerability is inherently risky. It means opening oneself up to judgment, criticism, or rejection. For someone who already doubts their value, this risk can feel insurmountable. They might think, what if I show them who I really am and they don't like it? To avoid this scenario, they choose the safety of inaction, even though it means denying their desire for connection. The fear of being misunderstood can also play a role. They might worry that their intentions won't be perceived as genuine, or that their attempts to connect could be misinterpreted. This fear can be especially strong if they've had past experiences where their efforts to reach out were met with indifference or rejection. Over time, these experiences can reinforce their belief that it's better to stay silent than risk being misunderstood or dismissed. Their silence then becomes a protective mechanism, a way to shield themselves from potential pain. Another factor to consider is the societal pressure and expectations that often influence how people perceive their own worth. In a world that places so much emphasis on external achievements and appearances, it's easy for someone to feel like they don't measure up. They might think, I'm not successful enough, I don't look the part, or I haven't accomplished enough to deserve someone like them. These thoughts can be paralyzing, making them hesitate to reach out, even when their heart is urging them to. It's also possible that they're projecting their insecurities onto you, assuming that you see them the same way they see themselves. If they believe they're not enough, they might assume you'll think the same and preemptively retreat to avoid confirming this fear. This projection creates a self-fulfilling cycle where their belief in their inadequacy prevents them from taking the actions that could lead to connection and validation. Ultimately, their struggle with self-worth and fear of rejection highlights a fundamental truth. We cannot force someone to see their own value or to overcome their insecurities. These battles are deeply personal and require introspection, healing, and self-compassion. While it's natural to want to reach out and reassure them, it's important to recognize that their silence is not about you. It's a reflection of their inner world, shaped by experiences, beliefs, and fears that only they can address. In the face of their silence, the best thing you can do is focus on your own sense of self-worth. Recognize that you are deserving of love and connection with someone who is willing and ready to show up for you. You cannot carry the weight of their insecurities or make decisions for them. What you can do is honor your own boundaries and trust that the right connection will come from mutual effort, respect, and courage.